Hey folks, it's Tim with another flashlight review. This one covers Lighten7's Elite S1B. This is one of their EDC models that was recently released. Before we dive into this light, the light, as with the other EDC series lights, comes in this nice little gift box and comes with ample foam cushioning, a holster that does not feature a quick release but rather a perma loop and a D loop, as well as a wrist strap. And within here are a spare O-ring and a clip. So just to cover off some of the highlights of the features of this light, it's a single 18650 size light featuring a XM-L2, U2, and tint in 1A. And it can output up to about 550 lumens for 2 hours, although I don't know if there's a step down yet, but I'll put that in my comments later with the runtime. It does feature HA3 hard anodizing. It's also rated to IPX8 standard for waterproof. So as with your C1A series, this is kind of a back to basics, kind of no frills light. So right at the get-go, we have a crenulated bezel, although this is integrated up to this portion and the entire top is removable, although of course not usable that way. However, it allows you access to the emitter as well as the reflector if one so desires. And this glass is not AR coated, as can be seen there. There is a orange peel reflector, although I feel that they could have gone with a smooth reflector for more throw, since this is the XM-L emitter. But in either way, this offers a more smooth beam as well as a flooded profile versus using a smooth reflector. And here's a close-up shot of the XM-L2 emitter. As with the C1A, the styling is rather staid. There really isn't much in the way of aesthetics. There are two circumferential grooves here that potentially aid with heat dissipation, although I haven't done the runtime testing yet, but I'll get to that in a bit later. While this bezel is removable, the rest of that part here is one single integrated piece with the battery tube itself. The body features two flat sides, of which one features the company name and the other one the model number. This texturing is fairly smooth, so it doesn't really contribute much in the way of grip. However, though, with this ledge here combined with these grooves here, I figure it gives a decent grip, at least with my medium-sized hands. The tail cap features a reverse mechanical clicky switch, so for those of you not familiar with that term, what that simply means is that one must fully depress that switch, and then finally upon letting go will the light turn on. By contrast, here's a XENO G10v2 that features a forward mechanical clicky switch, and as you can see, the light will engage with just a half press. And then finally to latch on. So that's the difference between a reverse clicky as well as a forward clicky. The two tail cap guards do protrude out enough that allows the light to tail stand, so as to allow use in candlelight mode. And you're probably picking up that flickering there on low mode, as I can see on my LCD screen here. And there is a slot on one side of the guard to allow the use of the wrist strap. So coming back to that clip for a second, that could be mounted either at the throat of the light or the indent here at the tail of the light, so it allows bezel up carry or bezel down carry. Case in point, here it is mounted on the tail cap side, and here it is mounted at the throat of the light to allow bezel up carry. So this offers some flexibility in terms of one's preference for the carry. It wasn't too difficult to mount, and it's not so tight as to cause problems, although I feel like the tension should be good enough to retain in place, of course, given it's smooth and that it is mounted to that flat, smooth surface. One does need to be a little bit mindful that it may potentially pop out. In bezel up mode, one can potentially use this as an emergency makeshift headlamp if the bill of your cap is long enough, but it does work in a pinch. There is a spring within the tail cap and another that is within the head. Not really sure if you can really see that, but this particular spring within the head really acts more like a solid nodule rather than a spring, because it's fully compressed and it doesn't offer any rebound whatsoever. But at least it does allow the use of flat top cells. Given its intent as an EDC, it is currently the most compact of their single cell 18650 size lights. So from right to left we have their Elite M1B, Elite M1A, their S1A, and now the S1B. And by comparison to other manufacturers' light, it still ranks as one of the most compact, although it can't quite compete with XENO's S3A, which is currently the absolute most compact single cell 18650 size light in my collection. So again, XENO S3A, the Lighten7 Elite S1B, Fox Ferry's Rook Checkmate, Nightwalker's 550N3, Nitecore's P25 Smilodon, and last but not least, Through Night's Lynx. Given its overall compact form, the S1B does feel very good in my hands. Of course, that's totally subjective because, again, I have medium-sized hands. Although I do feel like the tail cap guards here are well positioned in such a way that it doesn't obstruct one from operating the light. I have operated other lights that do have tail cap guards that come in a little bit too close, such that when you depress it, your thumb is actually kind of caught in between, so at least that's a good sign there. The underhand grip is reasonably good as well, again, because of this groove here, and without the clip installed, I feel that that offers a nice resting position for your index finger, and that semi-sharp edges, because this hasn't been fully deburred, does allow you a little bit additional, I guess, traction, if you will, to keep the light in place. Although the size of the barrel is still suited for 18650, it is more reminiscent of a 2 CR123 size light like Surefire's E2D LED versus your more standard 18650 size light. The grooves for the clip does allow the use of cigar grip, although it's not the most secure, but it is possible if you should so desire to use it that way. Bottom line, I find it fits very comfortably, but again, of course, that's subjective based upon hand size and preference. I've now reviewed a bunch of their lights, and the S1B ranks pretty much on par with the rest of the lights. That is to say, overall pretty good, although the anodization I felt was, even though it's HA3, potentially a notch below what I would give a top grade, only because there were certain areas where it was missing. So for example, around the inside edge of that groove there, around the bezel, although the bezel itself is nicely polished and fully deburred, my sample did suffer from an issue with right here around these edges here. It just felt like it wasn't fully rubbed down or polished down. So I think it's a one-off because the Elite C1A, which I'm also reviewing at the same time, for all intents and purposes is pretty much the same light and doesn't suffer from this issue, nor does any of the other lights. So again, I'm leaning towards the fact that this is potentially a once-off, but of course I'll bring this to their attention. Now back on the subject of the anodization, it is applied very well. This is supposed to be HA3, and however though, as I had mentioned, there were some light edges around there that were missing, likewise around with the tail cap, although I'm not sure it quite comes out on the video because it could kind of come off as a reflection from the light, but as to what my eyes are actually seeing, there are very minor spots here that are missing. However though, it could potentially be a handling issue after the anodization was applied, since I don't think it's during the process, because otherwise it would be missing from between these grooves as well, which are common issues with poor or improper anodization process. My particular sample was not greased in the heads nor the O-rings, so the thread, it did feel there was like some minor amount of grittiness in there, as you could probably hear from that. So that's never a good thing to hear. Neither end of the threads are anodized, but again, at least as far as the tail cap, because it was greased properly, I didn't really feel much in the way of grittiness, as well as no issues encountered while threading it in. One thing of note is that that spring used in the tail cap does have a pretty high tension rate, so as you're about to unscrew it to the very end, you might want to apply a little downward pressure to prevent it from grinding the very last edges of the tail cap thread there. Of course, that advice doesn't just apply to this light, but it can apply to any lights you own that may have particularly strong springs on either end of the light. The reverse clicky does provide nice tactile feedback and does operate flawlessly, unlike one of the shadow lights where I've noticed like upon depressing it, sometimes it would go off halfway through the operation, but this one has operated flawlessly. And the overall light does feel solid enough, but again, as mentioned, just because of perhaps the handling process, I'll give it one grade below top notch. Another point I'd like to highlight is during installation of the tail clip, I didn't mark up this finish at all, so it is reasonably strong. And that was at either end. Since the light is a single solid piece aft of the bezel, so meaning the tube is connected directly to the light and it's not threads here, I do feel that that's just a little bit stronger than certain lights that do have threads there. It does feel solid enough, however, as mentioned, it's just kind of like those little nitpicks that I have, as well as the finishes around here that I would like to see them address. The UI of the S1B is very straightforward, if perhaps a bit rudimentary, as I had mentioned. Like with the C1A, there are 3 fixed output levels that always comes on in high, then cycles to medium, and then low. And as you're likely picking up, there is that flicker, so I assume it's probably PWM, although I don't detect it with my eyes and I am sensitive to that. However, unlike the C1A, there is only one blinking mode, and that is a fixed rate strobe. There is no other blinking modes after that. The overall spill is about roughly 70 degrees. And the hotspot is roughly 20 degrees, but again, this doesn't necessarily mean that this is a thrower, because as seen in the beam profile section, this has a orange peel reflector and does cast a relatively smooth beam overall. So I've got my equipment set up again to take lux measurements. I do have the XENO G10v2 on again, just to make sure that I'm within the 235 ballpark range. So that way it ensures that each video to video you could actually compare the readings to each other and make a direct comparison. The exposure as usual is locked in at 1/50th of a second for shutter speed, f-stop at 1.8, and ISO 400 with a sunny white balance. So first up we have Lighten7's S1B. They currently do not publish any throw measurements for their lights, so I don't have anything to go by, but so far at the 30-second mark I'm in about the 238 range, 240 actually, and that translates to the throw in the captions. Next up is their Elite S1A, which features a older XM-L2 emitter but with higher output, I think 700 versus 550, and with the corresponding bump in output is also a corresponding throw. But of course, this is a bigger light than the S1B. So now roughly into the 30-second range, I'm at the 325 lux. Now we have XTAR's TZ20 Platoon. This was the upgraded model with the XM-L2 emitter. Not the XM-L2, but the XM-L2 emitter. And they claimed a 175 meter beam distance, which should be about 7,700 candela. And at 5 meters, I'm actually expecting only 305 lux. But after the 30-second mark, I'm still hovering close to 360, so it's always good to be able to either match or exceed manufacturer's specs, but of course, caveat, my readings tend to be lower than other reviewers for lux measurements. And last but not least, we have XENO's S3A. This is a very compact light, only pumping out about 350 lumens, and features an XM-L2 emitter. Now they've claimed a 65 meter beam distance, which is achieved through 1050 candela. So I'm actually expecting only about 42 lux. But it's good to see at the 30-second mark, I'm still hovering around 66, so that's pretty nice. So as an initial conclusion, I do find the Elite S1B, like with the C1A that I just reviewed, is a reasonably good light. However though, the UI, again, subjectively, I find that it's a little bit rudimentary because it harkens back to the days when I first got into collecting lights and you had to cycle through blinking modes in order to access your output levels. Whereas a majority of the manufacturers nowadays have implemented a way to hide the blinking modes as part of the standard UI process so that you don't have to cycle through it when you're going through the output modes. So that's something that I would like to see them change in the future revision of this particular light. But bottom line is that overall the build is pretty good. As I had mentioned, the anodization, as with the C1A, I think it's a handling process after the application that I would like them to improve upon. Also the fact that my particular sample, this one, didn't come greased over here, so that's something they missed. But of course, that's one light out of a bunch that I've tested of theirs that this has occurred now. It's reasonably compact for a single cell 18650 size light, and the overall beam profile, I guess in terms of consideration for someone looking to purchase this light, it offers a floodier beam profile than a thrower, so something that they had actually, if I'm not mistaken, targeted like say bicyclists, because the C1A was designed to be mounted via a clip onto bicycles, so they actually do sell that kit as well. So the S1B could be used in that manner as well. So the floody profile in that case, as well as, still a decent throw, is I feel, in my opinion, subjectively makes for a better biking light. One would need to make a determination if you really need more throw or a combination of a nice smooth beam and perhaps a slightly floodier profile when considering the purchase of this light. So bottom line, not too bad. However, though, as mentioned, I would like to see them tighten up that manufacturing process just a little bit more. As part of FTC disclosures, the Lighten7 Elite S1B was provided by Lighten7 for review. Thanks again for watching.